whatever the exam be, whatever the task is, writing isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the most difficult language skills to acquire as well as to teach. Because by its nature, writing is something that you do on your own. It's a solo activity. You do it silently. There's a little bit of physical effort. You're writing, and it also needs time. Maybe this is why it doesn't automatically endear itself to learners. And for teachers, it's not easy either, because we are teaching the Snapchat generation of teenagers who are more comfortable writing through social media posts and text messages. But when it comes to the basic mechanism of writing a short paragraph or a sentence, somehow they seem to struggle. Now, I'm not at all embarrassed to share this experience with all of you here. This is one skill that has given me nightmares as a trainer, because the conundrum that I face is, where do I start with my students? Do I start with the basics of sentence correction? Do I start with ideation, teaching vocabulary, or do I go into text analysis and genre awareness? So writing is like this mythical beast with many heads. You start on something and something else falls apart. So how do you tackle this beast? Well, there is no right and wrong way to go about it, obviously, because it's as vast as it's complex. But maybe one good starting point would be to take your learners through the writing process. And by this, what I mean is that you give them the tools and strategies to critically think about who they're writing for, what the reason, what the purpose of their writing is, how to organize their ideas. Now, like I've mentioned, there is no one way to go about with this, but learners who understand the writing process are in a better position to write anything that you give them, because they're already in the HOTS territory, or higher order thinking skills territory, because they're evaluating, prioritizing information, they're collaborating with their peers, they're self-critiquing, and then they go on to finally publish whatever they have to write. So one disclaimer here, this is not the only way to go about with teaching writing, and this webinar is by no means an exhaustive one where we go about with discussions about how to teach writing. We're sharing ideas, we're sharing best practices, so feel free to take what you think would benefit your learners. Now, if we observe how professional writers write, we'll see that they all follow a process right from a blank page to all the way up to a final finished published document. It's never as simple as putting pen to paper, because writing is not a linear process. It's not like baking a cake. So you have to be willing to go back and forth between different components. You have to be able to alter and make changes to your content. So this is what works for professional writers. And thankfully, this is also an approach that Trinity promotes through the ISE exam. Now, in the writing paper in ISE, there is a section, a box for planning notes, as you can see here, which is where you think about what you want to write before you actually go on to produce your final writing. And there's also a reminder towards the end of your paper to go back to your answer, check for errors in organization, in language, whether you've missed any part of the question. This is because Trinity recognizes that writing is a complex mechanism and learners need to be taught how to go about with it. So without further ado, let's have a look at all these components one by one and see how we can breathe life into this process through different interesting activities. I can't stress enough the importance of this stage, especially for young writers, for young middle school or high school students, because unfortunately, this is one stage which learners tend to give a miss because they think this is more work on top of what they're already writing. But they need to understand that even the best of writers have to go through this idea generation stage through brainstorming. So maybe there has to be a little push from our side. What we could do is we could give them background information about the topic that they're writing in order to activate schemata. We could also model the process for them. So you can work with a graphic organizer, something, a very simple spider web, a simple mind map, take a prompt, show your learners that at this stage, at the brainstorming stage, you're not really bothered about what point is good, what doesn't work. You only want to populate the graphic organizer with ideas as they pop into your head. And after your students see your thinking process, they can replicate it in their own groups and only work on the brainstorming part. So you give each group topics or points or questions to write on, but they focus not just on a full-blown writing, but only on the brainstorming stage. And slowly they'll get to see that this strategy is brilliant when you have too many ideas and you want to narrow it down. Or if you're running out of ideas, you're in a, like if you're facing a writer's block, even that would help you. So please encourage your students to go through this important, vital brainstorming stage. Now comes studying the task. So studying the prompt. There are two essential components to it. One is where you think about the purpose or the format, and the other is where you think about who your audience is. Now, as teachers, we tend to focus a little more on the first bit. We focus on the format, the genre, but there is one more step, which is a prerequisite, which is should precede this task, and that is being mindful of who your audience is, who's going to read your writing task. This is again critical for young learners because they tend to think that whatever they're writing is for their reader, is for their teacher, sorry, which is technically true, but not really. So we need to teach our learners to identify who the reader is. It's also very easy to go wrong with this step because if you confuse roles, then you may end up using the wrong tone and the wrong register, and that might be disastrous. So to give you an example, if you want to write an informal email, the tone and the style and the register will be different if the audience is or the reader is your friend, as opposed to an informal email that you write to a colleague. So if we look at an example here, you have to write an informal email to a new person who has joined your team. And you write, "Hi, Joyce, how are you doing? I'm going to be your new cubicle mate. We must hang out soon." This is definitely not going to go down too well, unless, of course, that person is more forgiving. Also, if you want to turn down a party invite and you go too formal with your email and you say, "I regret to inform you that I will not be able to make it to your party." So these are two different extremes. So we need to strike a balance, which is why we need to show our learners, we need to focus attention on who the audience is, what your relationship is with the audience. Now, generally speaking, if the more familiar you are with the reader, the less formal it's going to be, and vice versa. And once you've established these two things, it's easier for you to communicate with your reader. You use an appropriate style to communicate with this person. The next step, if you want to expand your learner's concept of audience, the best way to go about it is to use activities that lend itself to various audiences. So maybe you can get your learners to write about the same topic for different audiences. So you could maybe ask them to describe a favorite video game to a friend who is more or less familiar with these kinds of technology or video games. And after this is through, you ask them to write about the same video game for an adult, a parent, or maybe a teacher or the school principal who doesn't know anything about video games. So when you do an activity like this, it's easy for your learners to see how perspective and narrative changes according to the readers, according to the different audiences. Or you could use slightly exaggerated examples of formal emails and letters like I did right now. And this is not just to get a reaction from your students. When you introduce different texts as examples, the connect becomes easier for your students because writing and reading go hand in hand. In order to be a good writer, you have to have some knowledge, a critical reader at least. So introduce different kinds of texts for students to analyze. They internalize it, and then they go on to produce their own writing. Next comes purpose. Why you're writing something. Is it to educate the reader? Is it to entertain, to persuade? This is where genre comes into the picture. And in order for any writing to belong to a particular genre, it has to cater to certain accepted traits, like we all know. Now, the takeaway here is genre is almost always determined by the needs and expectations of the audience, which is why it is vital to go to teach your students about audience and reader first before you teach them format or genre. Now, we all know that there are many different kinds of writing genres. We have narrative, descriptive, expository, arguments, and you also have different kinds of format genres like essays, articles, emails, journals, which your students have to produce in any writing exam. Now, one thing about genre is that it's not watertight. It's not like batter that you put into a muffin tray and it's set. It's flexible. Genre differs according to the generation that you're in. It differs according to the culture, the society that you're from. So we need to have a little bit of awareness about this. And so I'm going to ask my colleagues to share this on the chat box with you, a guidance on genres, some tips on genres, because we won't be able to cover everything, obviously, in this one webinar. So feel free to share it with your learners. They're all from the Trinity website, the ISE website. Feel free to share it with them, and they can use it as a ready reckoner when they start writing any task. Now, one great way and tested way of helping your students understand the concept of audience and purpose is to get them to unravel the question that's given to them. I'm going to show you how to do this, but in any high stakes exam like ISE or a school leaving exam like CBSE or ICSE, if you do not understand your question properly, you may end up misinterpreting or leaving out some parts of the question. And that can be quite disastrous. You may end up being marked down. So it's a good exercise to spend maybe a little bit of time with your students, say 1 or 2 minutes maximum. They'll get the hang of it soon, and help them to see how a simple question like this can be broken down into smaller component parts. So here the question is, you want to buy some new clothes on Saturday. You're writing an email to a friend explaining what you're going to buy and which shops you want to go to. And you also want to invite your friend to go with you. So there are many different parts. It looks quite simple. So just remember that if it's a young writer, say a class 5 or a class 4 student, they may easily be carried away with the whole thing, okay, I have to write an email. All right, I may need to invite my friend. And they miss out some subtasks in between. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into a template like audience, format, purpose, the subtasks. So there are 3 subtasks in this one simple question. And you also focus on the language that you want to use in it, a rough idea of the informal language or formal language that you want to write. So when your students see this, it becomes a little bit of a habit. And I've done this with my a lot of students in schools in India, where after some time, you don't ask them to do this, but they still get into this habit of thinking about what the different subdivisions, and it's a great exercise. Now, for my EFL classes, I used to teach in Japan. I would use a lot of nonverbal prompts. It also works with any great, any school, any institution in India. What you want to do here is to give them maybe some simple cartoons or comic strips with very little language in it. So what you essentially want to do is not just to break the tedium in the classroom, but also to use this as a springboard to have a conversation, to have them to write something, to debate about different prompts. So you could use maybe something, a weird cartoon like the one you're seeing here. Students see the cartoon and they have to describe it. So you use a narrative style or a descriptive style, whatever you want. Or you could use a slightly controversial cartoon like the one that you're seeing here right now. Just to give a little bit of background information, which you have to for your students as well once in a while if they're not familiar with the context. This happened in 2018 in the US Open final, and you have Serena Williams who she threw a hissy fit and broke her racket. And in this cartoon, the umpire is asking her opponent, Naomi Osaka, to just let her win. But what made this cartoon controversial was that the cartoonist had used lots of exaggerated features to show how irrational Black people are. So something like this can be a great way to start a conversation, to have a debate with your students, and then they can write maybe an argumentative topic or a discursive topic. You don't have to use something as strong as this. You could even use a milder cartoon, a milder comic strip like Calvin and Hobbes. So here Calvin is asking his father, Dad, how do soldiers killing each other solve the world's problems? So I don't have to tell you this. It's a great way to start a conversation and a great way to attempt a discursive topic, a discursive essay. And the thing is, because there is so little language here, your students can come up with questions. So they want to say that, okay, I want to write about this. This has to be my prompt. And they can start writing. Now, the next step is where you think about how you're going to structure your writing, the logic of it. At this stage, you're still not writing a full-blown task. You're thinking about what will go in your introduction, what will go in the body, what will go in the conclusion. So any good writing has to have clarity. Any good writing is where the reader can follow the writer's train of thoughts and receives the message loud and clear. And it should never be that the writer expects the reader to read between the lines all the time and struggle through the chaos that's there in his head. Now, for any piece of organized writing, the basic feature is a paragraph. So if you know how to write a good paragraph, you can write anything. You can write, because this is the foundation. These are building blocks. So for any writing, whether you're writing an essay, an article, an email, you need to get this right before you can move on to anything else. Now, the thing is, a lot of learners think that they're very good at paragraph writing, but we all know that in reality, what they do is they just divide their writing into chunks. And that's really sad because there is so much more to a paragraph than just that. So let's see what it should include, what a good paragraph should include. It should have one main point, one main idea, which is expressed through the topic sentence. And this is like a mini introduction. And this has to be supported or bolstered by supporting ideas. And each paragraph also needs to have a mini conclusion. Now, just telling your students that a paragraph needs to have a main idea and supporting ideas will not do. Neither will it help to tell them that, oh, keep your paragraphs logical, because what is logic? What is logical for you may not be logical for me, right? Now, a common pattern of sequencing in the case of writing is to keep your writing from the most general to the most specific. Now, one thing I need to be clear here, you can even keep it the other way around from specific to general, but you have to be a very good writer. You have to have a solid handle on your writing skills in order to be able to do this. So it's always safe to ask your students to keep it from general to specific. But there's a catch here. This is the exact opposite of how we speak. So just think about it. If you're in a casual conversation with a friend or with anybody, you don't have a main idea or a thesis all the time, do you? We engage in small talk first, and then if the conversation is long enough, it may or may not develop into a main idea. So we can't really blame our learners for getting the logic wrong, because they're essentially replicating how they talk in their writing. So now we have to tell them to do it the other way around, reverse the sequence, to keep the best for later and start off with something more general first. But just giving formulae or giving rules like this will not help. We all know that. It will stick only if you give them sufficient examples to see what you want to say. So if you're saying that this is what a paragraph looks like or should be, then show them something that reinforces that point. And I'm going to do that right now, but I'm also going to do in a nutshell, see what a paragraph should have. So it has to have a topic sentence, like I've mentioned, or a thesis statement. That's your mini introduction expressing the main idea. You also have a concluding sentence. And it's also important to link every paragraph to the one that comes before and the one that comes after this to establish coherence. Now, let me show, I'll come to this graphic organizer in a bit, I beg your pardon, but I want to go into a sample paragraph first. So for those of you who've grown up in the 90s, this was one show that really rocked our world. So I'm going to give you a little time to have a look at this. Say 30 seconds maybe. Right. Now, on the face of it, it looks all right. In fact, it is quite a good paragraph, but it's missing something. It's missing the topic sentence. So I want you to write a suitable topic sentence for this paragraph on the chat box. Don't worry about it being right or wrong. Just give it a go. It's going to be fun. And then I'm going to share with you what I have written. So it's going to be different. Yours will be different from mine. Right. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to write a topic sentence and introduction for this paragraph.
So the answers coming in, Shoma. One is said fashion, life in the 90s, memories, growing up in the 90s. And that's how the cult began. Walking down memory lane, changing times. Yes. I really need to change my hairstyle.
Being trendy.
Yeah. Fashion in 90s, Sassy magazine, 90s saga, nostalgia, wonderful. Being trendy, the new kid, the new look.
Okay, teachers. Sorry, Dale, just a second. Years. Lovely, lovely, lovely. But remember, this is your topic sentence, so it has to be a sentence, okay? So can you try and structure it again, please? It's not a caption, it's a proper sentence. Okay, fashion of 90s, style of 90s. Okay, all right. Some very interesting answers here. Now, I'm going to share with you my topic sentence. Thinking about the 90s brings back a lot of memories for me about fashion and popular culture. So it's a complete sentence, and what I've done is I'm encapsulating the main idea, which I'm going to support with sentences that come after the topic sentence. So you see what I'm doing here. If I'm going to show them what a paragraph should look like, I have to give them examples, sufficient good examples from good academic texts to bring home that point. Right. Now, when your students know how to write a good paragraph, you can do anything with them. You can go on to teach them what an introduction should look like, what the body paragraphs should look like, and the concluding paragraphs as well. Now, they all differ according to they have different conventions according to the genres. So we won't be able to cover every bit of that. But I'm going to come back to the hamburger paragraph organizer. So this is what a paragraph, any good writing should be. You should have a topic sentence. It has to have enough supporting sentences as well as conclusion. Now, the introduction, like we all know, has to have a good hook in order to get audience's attention. So it could be a rhetorical question, it could be a quotation, but don't make it hackneyed by taking it from the question. That's down to the depth, and no reader really likes to go through that. So again, if this is how you're going to introduce your introduction, show them a good introduction. There are different conventions for the middle paragraphs as well. There is discursive, there is, you have SPSC, you have, okay, why am I stuttering here? Now, for every convention, there are different accepted traits. So students need to be familiar with this. And when you show them these traits, again, get good academic text. Maybe you could have them to do a jigsaw text. You cut off the paragraphs and they move them around spatially to get the logical sequence. And finally, a conclusion as well. So once your students understand this, they're good to go. They're good to go to the first draft. So what I'm trying to say is you practice the component parts, all the component parts that I've shown just now. You have audience, you have purpose, you have genre. So you practice these individual bits first with them, show them tons and tons of good and bad examples, and then ask them to write their full-blown task. And the first step is your first draft. This is your sloppy copy. You're still not writing your final. This is not the final document that you submit to your teacher or to publish. Now, this is where you're taking ideas from the brainstorming stage. You're thinking about audience, you're thinking about the purpose of it, you're thinking about the language, you're thinking about your organization. And you also want to see if it's conveying the message to the reader that it's supposed to convey. Now, one great way for you to check whether it's conveying the right message is to have it passed around, maybe through the teacher, your teacher, or your peers, or a professional editor, which brings us to peer feedback. Now, feedback doesn't have to be always from the teacher. One great way to make writing collaborative is to get students involved in this process. Having said that, there needs to be a little bit of learner training here, because you can't expect young students to be able to give constructive feedback to their peers. They're going to tear them apart. So you need to train them. And I think it can be done brilliantly with any level of learners, even class 2 and class 3. And I'm going to show you how to do this. Now, the reason why I feel so strongly about peer feedback is that it's very easy to see errors in other people's writing than to see errors in your own. And if you're giving written feedback to your friends, your comprehension is enhanced of the writing that you're doing. So it's a great exercise. So how do we go about it? What you could do is, for young learners, say class 4 or 5, get them to work in groups, or if they're very comfortable, if it's a small class, get them to say 3 things that they liked about their friend's writing and 3 things that did not make much sense, gently pushing them into giving a slightly negative feedback. So you say maybe anything about 3 things. Could be about the word choice, it could be about organization. If they didn't understand, if some bits of it was incoherent, they can start doing this. And with older students, with maybe class 7 or 8, you can show them your marking strategy. So your codes that you use. So for example, the ones that I use would be like punctuation, informal, T for tense, subject verb agreement. You share it with your students, and it doesn't take more than 10 to 15 minutes. That's what I mean. So you do it at the beginning of your session, you share it with your students, your marking technique, and then they annotate each other's texts, each other's writing with this marking strategy. If you're a lazy teacher like me, what I used to do is I would even make it as an exercise, and I would give it as a homework task for them. So they would take each other's writing and they would mark it and bring it back the next day. So it's a great way. It saves me a lot of time, yes, but it's a great way for them to also understand the different parts that constitute a good writing. So they're more aware of the writing process. Once you're through with getting feedback from your friends or your peers, your teacher, then you go back to your sloppy copy, you start revising it, you start making changes, content changes. And at this stage, you have to be willing to play around with your writing, reorganize your writing, in fact, get rid of things that are not making sense instead of being stubborn about it, or even refining word choices. Editing would be to check if it's following written conventions of written English, for example, punctuation, tenses, etc. And after this is over, you're good to go. You have your written task. It's good to go to the teacher. It's good to go to the publisher. So if your students understand this process from 1 to 6, they can tackle any writing task. They can do any writing exam. Because again, like I've mentioned, they're already in the HOTS territory, in the higher order thinking skills territory. So it shouldn't be difficult for them. Which brings us to ISE, which is an all 4 skills exam from Trinity College London. I'm not going to discuss the format of this exam because I've already done this in the previous webinars. So today I'm going to focus only on the writing module. So in ISE's reading and writing section, reading and writing, the 2 skills are tested independently as well as together through the reading into writing task as well as the extended writing task. So just what you see here is the reading into writing, which is a follow-up from the multi-text task that you have in task 2 of your reading section. So just to take you through this one more time, if you're not familiar with this exam, students are given multiple texts, 3 or 4 discrete passages. They also have one infographic like the one text C here. And they have to answer 15 questions based on the reading passages. And this leads on to the reading into writing section. So here you have to be able to curate information from the 3 texts, summarize ideas, to identify key information from all the 3 texts in order to attempt a writing task, which can be an essay, an article, a review, etc. This is exactly how modern readers read and write, and that's exactly what ISE is trying to promote through a task like this. The second task is your extended writing task, a more free-flowing, free writing, extended, independent writing. So here you don't have to refer to any reading text. This is a straightforward genre like essay, article, emails, review, depending on which level you are at. So let's have a quick look at the sub-skills that are deployed during your writing module. So we've covered most of it in the previous webinar as well as today, except summarizing and synthesizing, which I'm going to come to in a bit. So you have mining for ideas, you have planning, both macro, organization, revising, and synthesizing. Now, whatever the exam be, whatever the task is, even if your learners don't need to write a summary, it's a good activity, it's a good skill to know, because it also helps teachers to monitor students' comprehension of a reading task. And it also helps students enhance their comprehension, because when they're summarizing, what they're doing essentially is selecting and condensing information, condensing the big ideas in their own words. So there is no better way of knowing whether they have understood a text or not. I've discussed this quite a few times in the 2 webinars before. Now, summarizing may not be the easiest of skill for young learners, because when you're summarizing, you're trying to get the best information, But for most young learners, they think that everything is important. So we may need to give them a little bit of a template or a scaffold to work on. The one that you're seeing right now is something that I've always used. Don't worry, I'm going to share it with you on the chat box. We are sharing a template as well as a scaffold that you can use for learners who are struggling with summaries. Now, it's impossible for teachers to have ready-made summaries of text all the time, because sometimes you have learners who want to see model summaries. So one thing that makes your life easy would be a software called textcompactor.com, which I've discussed earlier as well. What you need to do here is just select your reading passage, you choose the number of words you want the summary to be for, and you share your screen with your learners so they see a model summary, but it's something that has been produced or generated by the computer. So you can again make it an exercise. You can tell them that, okay, this is something that the computer has written. So do you want to exclude something from it? Do you want to add something to it? So it becomes a little more fun and a more active process. Another thing that you need to do is mining, that is extracting information from different reading tasks. So you could do a little bit of note taking on the side of every reading passage that you do. And instead of giving them one long task, chunk it up into smaller portions, ask them to stop at crucial junctures, make maybe 1 or 2 sentence notes, and then use those notes to collate those notes in order to write a proper 1 or 2 paragraph length summaries. So I think we've come more or less to the end of this webinar, but I would also like to share 2 things with you here. Most of the activities that I've shared are collaborative, promote collaborative writing, but there's one which is my absolute favorite, and you can do this after your students know how to write an entire writing task. They know all the component parts of the writing process. So you give a prompt to, so maybe they have to work in small groups. Don't keep the group sizes larger than 3 or 4 students. You give the prompt to the first person, they write a full length paragraph, the introduction, okay? Remember, it cannot be just 1 sentence, a topic sentence, or maybe 1 idea. It has to be an entire introduction. And then they pass it on to the next person who's responsible for developing the next argument that the first person had mentioned in the writing prompt. And so on and so forth till you reach the conclusion. Now, what makes this a good activity is that you're not just writing an email or an article or an essay according to the prompt. You're actually reading it, you're editing what the person before you has done, you are reviewing it, you're also moving on, you're applying the next step in the process. So it's a great exercise. It's a great way to get your students motivated to write, and you can do it with any level of learner. They'll still be excited. For the older kids, it tends to get a little chaotic because they'll try and criticize everything that comes before. But anyway, you can, with a little bit of guidance, they'll slowly get the hang of it. Coming to tools that you can use when you're teaching online, telescopictext.org is a brilliant software. I wish I had it when I was young. A lot of times we come across learners who are reluctant to expand sentences. So they're very happy with 1 or 2 sentences and they say, I don't have anything more to write. So what do you do then? You're tearing out your hair. You don't know how to help them. This website, what it does is you just paste the sentence that you have a problem with onto the toolbar. You highlight the words that you want expansion on. And what it does is it unfolds and then expands it. So you can literally see how writers expand go about with their writing. So it's brilliant. And it starts off with from very basic words and adjectives. You should try it. It's a very basic software. Anybody can use it. The second one is writetheworld.com, which there are 2 things about this website which I like. First thing is it gives you prompts. So if you think that you've hit the dead end with writing and you don't have any more ideas, this website will give you some ideas in the form of pictures, so you can carry on with it without stopping. The other thing that it does is it also creates a vibrant community of writers. So you can get your students if they're willing to participate in competitions. And I think at this stage, learners really need to get involved with other writers, with the writing community as well, to make decisions about what and what not to write. It's a fun way of also tracking their writing, because the portfolio stays in the website and you can track or know what your learners are writing. And the third is holdfast.com, which is an extension of the collaborative task, collaborative writing that I mentioned previously. So you write something, you pass it on to the next person online, and again, that person sends it off, shares it with another person online. So in this process, you can write poems, you can write stories, you can write anything. So it's a brilliant website. You can give it a go. So that brings me to the end of this webinar, and I think I have another 15 minutes. Dale, how do we go about with it now?